Welcome back. Today I'm going to be showing my method of how I add a hem at the end of a piece of knitting. In this case we're going to cover the hung hem, and I'm also going to showcase a little tip to try and reduce this puckered area where it's joined, so that when it's off of the machine, like this one here, it's a lot less visible, but still very neat. So you're going to need some ravel cord or a high contrast thread. I have this green thin nylon thread. You'll need a transfer tool as well as a sewing or darning needle for the end. So let's get on and do some knitting. We've knit our body to the length that we require, and we want to add a finish at the end. So my tip for doing the hung hem is the very first row I knit, I'm going to make it looser. You can either decide whether you want one whole number or two whole numbers looser, and I'm going to add in the high contrast yarn into the same feeder as the main yarn, so that it'll highlight that row. And I'm just holding it in my hand the same you would do with the ravel cord method. I'm going to take that out of the feeder. Make sure to close the gate, and I'm going to go back down to a slightly tighter tension for the front facing band. So I'm going to go down by one number than the garment tension, which in this case I've gone from 8 up to 9 for the hanging row and down to 7 for the next set of rows. I'm going to knit the required number of rows for the band depth that I want. And then I want to create a turning row. So a turning row, I always go up to 10 and knit across. That allows the fabric enough space when the two bands are folded up that that turning row sits on the bottom and has enough stitch length for the depth of the band. So now on the inside that won't be seen, I'm actually going to turn my tension down one number again, so that the inside will be slightly tighter, but it will also mean it will be slightly shorter. So I'm going to add a few extra rows to compensate, to prevent the band being pulled in too much. So we can see now where our first slightly looser row was knit, the front band, turning row which is looser again, and the inside of the band. So now we want to come back with our transfer tool and start picking up these stitches, and we'll just go in for a close-up. When we're ready to hang the row with the contrast yarn in, which highlights what area we need to pick up, what I like to do is take the claw weights and put them to the back so that when we are picking up the front band area, the inside band, the stitches have the weight still on them to prevent them being lifted up off of the needles. So we're going to come in and have a look, and we want to pick up the top contrast areas. So in this case here on the end, and when we hang this stitch, I'm going to hang it and pull the needle all the way out, just for a little bit of added security. And again, come along to the next one, onto the transfer tool, and hang it onto the needle, pulling the needle all the way out. Now if you're more comfortable, you can stick with picking up one stitch at a time. You can move over to your 2 or 3 prong tool, and you can pick up as many stitches as you're comfortable with. But always make sure that you pull the needles all the way out. I'm going to pick up all of these stitches all the way across the bed. And then we'll come back and show you how to finish off the joining these 2 sets of stitches using a sewn method. So in the next section you will need a pair of scissors to cut the yarn, as well as your darning needle. So when you have all of your stitches hung, I'm going to pull out this contrast cord, and you can see by pulling it tight, it lifts up that loose row that we knit at the very beginning. So I'll continue pulling this all the way out. And now we're ready to do the sewing part. So for the sewing part, we want to take the yarn out of the feeder, and what I like to do is wrap the tail under and over the needles, and I normally do at least 4 lengths. To make sure I have a long enough tail. So all I'm doing is going under, coming up the other side, laying the yarn over, laying it down, going under as many times as you want, and you can cut the yarn. It's always better to have the tail too long than too short. And with the yarn cut, we can take our darning needle. So I've got quite a fine needle here, but it is a blunt tip, and I will thread that up. So the easiest way to do any threading is to fold the yarn over the needle, pinch at the base, pull out, and then push the yarn up and through, and then pull through that tail. Now if you're worried, depending on what fibre type you have, if you're worried about it getting tangled, then you can run it through a piece of wax. And when we have the needle prepped, ready to start sewing, we're going to come in from the front, catch both legs on the very first needle and pull the yarn through. And come down, catching both legs on the second needle and pulling the yarn through. Now I like to make sure that that yarn stays behind the gate peg, just to ensure that you don't tighten this area too much, because it's joining a band. You don't want any puckering or pulling in of the band. So again, I'm going to go up through the first needle, and that's just to secure the first stitch. From now on we'll do this same movement, so up through the first needle, miss, and go in to the following needle. Make sure you catch both legs every time, because you don't want to have any dropped stitches. And then we're going to see where this yarn comes out from, which in this case is the third needle. I want to go up through the second needle, again ensuring that I catch both legs, and then miss needle 3 and come down the following needle to the left. So I'll do this again. We go over to the right 1 needle, come over 2 needles to the left from the back to the front, and pull through. Front to back on 1 needle over to the right, 2 needles over to the left from the back to the front, and pull through. And you're just going to continue repeating this all the way along to the end, and once you are done you can pull the needles back, but the work won't drop from the machine because we've placed these loops of yarn that we're creating when we're sewing behind the gate peg. When we pull needles back out of work, the piece is still fixed on the gate peg, so you would have to lift it up and off of the gate pegs. So let's come back once we're finished with this. Here's a slightly better close-up of what it is that we're doing. So we can see the yarn is coming from this needle here. So we're going to come from the front of the machine, pick up both of the live stitches and pull through, and then skip over 2 to the left, catching both legs, come from the back to the front. Front to back, one over to the right, two over left, back to front. When you get to the last few stitches, you just follow the same technique. Make sure that none of the yarn gets caught up. And on the very last one, we need to go through the one on the right and then come back down through that last needle, making sure we catch both stitches. There we go. So now we can take our weights off, pull the needles back out of the way, all the way along the bed, and then we can lift the work from behind the gate pegs and that's us done. So you can kind of give it a bit of a tug, but once that's been washed, that'll settle out. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the thumbs up button if you enjoyed this video. Feel free to leave a comment, and until the next time, you've been watching Button Mouse the Wee Machine Knitter.